Hey everyone, welcome to our autoethnography lesson, or rather lecture. I'm going to be using Google Slides today, and I'll provide a link to this presentation, so if you'd like, you can look on as we go through this. So the goals of today's lecture, um, I really want us to come away understanding what an autoethnography is, both the form it can take and the purpose of it. And I think the best way to really understand an autoethnography is to look at some of the autoethnographies that you've read within this module. If you haven't yet read those three autoethnographies, that's okay. It's perfectly possible to still follow along, but do get to those readings as soon as you can, because I really believe, not just with this, but with any kind of writing, the best way to improve your writing of a particular genre is to read that kind of writing. So we're going to look at some sample paragraphs from the readings for this module. I'm going to share possible steps you can take for completing an autoethnography in terms of like the writing process. Then I want to talk about paragraphs. We'll look at one paragraph in particular from Roxane Gay's piece, and then I'll give you two structures that you might want to use when developing your own paragraphs. So let's get started. So first, what is an autoethnography? An autoethnography is the study of the self to get closer to culture. So the idea is an ethnography would be studying a specific culture or studying a specific society. An autoethnography is, I do want to study culture, I do want to study society, but I think that the best way to do that would be through some analysis and reflection of my own experiences, maybe my own writing, plus connecting it to outside research. So another way that I put it here is it's interested in connecting the personal with the outside world. And I think for me, the best example of what an autoethnography is Roxane Gay's piece, because if you remember, or if you haven't yet read, just spoiler alert, she starts with like historical information about weight loss, and that leads into her own experiences of getting weight loss surgery. And she's sort of always going from personal to outside research, and then showing how that outside research conflicts with or mirrors the experiences she had in the doctor's office, or the experiences she's had in her own like personal life, dating life, whatever the case may be. So I would suggest, if you're after this lecture still unclear on what an autoethnography is, rereading Roxane Gay's piece. And one thing that I find helpful also is reread her piece and then annotate every paragraph. And when I say annotate, I mean on the side of every paragraph, note what she's doing. So like you can put, for example, in the first paragraph, provide historical information. Second paragraph, provide experience of going to a specific place. And I mean, you don't have to do this, but you can, after you've annotated the entire essay, start to write your own autoethnography and then maybe follow the form that, or the structure that she's using. Again, and that's really just for folks who are still kind of confused or unsettled by what the autoethnography is supposed to be. So why are we electing to do this assignment? Why not the traditional research paper? And so I'm not going to bore you with like my personal research, but I will say that I've taught this class and I have done the traditional research project meaning I've had students write a traditional research project, and um, it tends to be research project topics about things that students are not necessarily excited by, but things that students feel like their instructor wants to hear about, or things that they feel like they already know the answer to, and so they feel comfortable writing about it. I don't know if that like totally translates, if you're not like if you've not written a ton in your academic career or in your personal life. But there's this thing that we do when we write sometimes, where we try to write about things where we already know how it's going to end. I'm sure there's like a metaphor for how we do the same thing in like other aspects of our life. But in fact, writing is fascinating and amazing because as you write, your thoughts can change, or you can actually create thoughts as you're writing them. Like it's not necessarily the case that everything has been predetermined. Of course, through revisions and more revisions and more revisions, the piece might ultimately look like you knew what the answer was going to be the whole time, but the actual process of writing the first draft and the second draft doesn't necessarily have to be that. So I don't want to ramble, but I'll just say that I found that the traditional research project, I would get a lot of papers on like the death penalty is bad, the death penalty is good, marijuana should be legal, where the answers were already clearly laid out, the evidence was already out there, and that's the other thing. There was nothing new being put on the table with the traditional research paper. And so by proposing we all create this autoethnography, I'm also, and I have to change this because this is spelled wrong. By proposing the autoethnography, I think I'm guaranteeing that everything will be new because no one has your specific set of experiences. And so just the act of you bringing in your personal experiences, the paper will present something new. I think I covered, and so let me just go to the third point. The autoethnography also believes that the self and things that you produce or remember can be a kind of evidence. And so what that means is, if you remember Roxane Gay's piece, she talks about her personal experience of going to the doctor's office, and she reflects on that memory, right? So that's a kind of evidence then that she can use when answering the question of why do people elect to get weight loss surgery? And when I say things produced, a very popular kind of autoethnography is one where writers sort of go digging into their past and retrieve writing samples, so journal entries, old Facebook messages, old Twitter posts, old writing assignments. And they bring that into their autoethnography and sort of reflect on what they were saying or why they were saying it. They reflect on the piece of writing in order to answer whatever larger question they posed. So that's another cool thing that an autoethnography can do. That's actually the purpose of an autoethnography. And so like the formula, I think, of a proper autoethnography would be you're studying yourself, you're studying outside research, and by combining this, you come away with an understanding of some aspect of culture and or society. Okay, so let's go back to this. In terms of form, everything that you've read thus far has been very traditional, it's using paragraphs, but there are other autoethnographies that use diary entries. So that might look like in italics an old diary entry, and then what follows is a reflection of that diary entry. Some autoethnographies use images, some use like video clips. In the past, it was a smaller cohort and they had more time. But in the past, I've had students who have conducted interviews and then included those interviews within their autoethnography, like video clips of those interviews with permission, of course. So this is just to say there's no one form that you must use when completing your own autoethnography. I think that the rubrics that I provide won't stress form, it'll stress content. And so that should be really the focus, making sure you are reflecting, making sure you are bringing in outside research. That's more important to me than, do you have 8 paragraphs? Are all of these paragraphs 6 sentences each? Et cetera, et cetera. So here is a paragraph from On Anarchism in New York. And what I've done is I've color-coded a sample paragraph from this autoethnography. And I think, to just save on time, I'm going to read the annotated version to you. So this paragraph starts with, while my naive 13-year-old self could only refer to banal stereotypes, I was emerging deeper and deeper into the topic. So 2 points here. While my naive 13-year-old self, the writer is actually reflecting on her younger self. That's a typical move that's made in an autoethnography. And the idea of the person saying, I was emerging deeper and deeper into the topic, that's also a common move in an autoethnography where you explain how you came to be interested in the topic that you'll be talking about. I think this is very common in like other kinds of writing, right? Where in your introduction you explain how you came to know the topic. But I think maybe you might have noticed that in an autoethnography, this part can be longer. The part meaning explaining how you got to know your topic. It can also appear later on in the autoethnography. It's not necessary that it appears in the beginning. Okay, so then she writes, I had started following blogs that report on anarchist activities in all of North America and was shocked to see what I had thought to be more of a teenage phase like punk rock was actually an entire community of people. So here, the writer is acknowledging that they had a change of belief through the act of research, through the act of thinking, through the act of writing, right? They thought that anarchists were just this alternative group of young kids just messing around, doing nothing important. And through the act of research, that idea got flipped on its head. That's a really important and cool feature of the autoethnography, that you can begin and let your readers know, I'm interested in this question. Through my experiences, I believe this is the answer, or through what I know from research, this is what I believe is the answer. And then as you write, as you research, as you investigate, you might change your belief. And you can say that. You can say, it turns out what I mentioned in the beginning is totally wrong. That the autoethnography is interested in that process. Okay, so then, looking at Jonas across from me, I was once again amazed at how normal he looked. His black polo, dark denim jeans, and black sneakers did not allude to any political orientation in particular, nor did his bike or his backpack. Notice the details, by the way, in that sentence, just visual details. The backpack itself was his constant companion, a habit he acquired during his stay in prison, he had told me. So here, this is a really important feature of an autoethnography where you can combine your observation of someone with what they tell you, because an autoethnography is interested in you creating new kinds of evidence. And so what that can mean is going out there and interviewing people, or going out there and observing someone interact with the thing you're interested in, or observing a place that you're interested in. And so what's cool here is the way that her observations kind of don't tell the whole picture, but the combination of her observation with this person's testimony, we get a fuller picture of not only who Jonas is, but what an anarchist is, or how complicated an anarchist's life is. And then it continues, with a Mary Poppins-esque magic, he continuously whipped out treasures that so far had included several pairs of socks, overnight gear, boxing attire, a computer, tobacco, plus several additives, beer, water, and several crumpled up issues of the last edition of his magazine. There we go. So just a point about this last sentence. She's mentioning details about Jonas's bag here. So one thing to be weary of is when you're presenting like visual details about a person that's related to your topic, or when you're presenting personal experiences, it should be clear to you how this is helping the reader and how this is helping you better understand your question. And so here, though it might not appear so when you read it the first time, when you read it the second time, you realize by showing us what's in Jonas's bag, she's able to better understand what an anarchist is, or who an anarchist is. And she's also able to show her readers how complicated the life of an anarchist is, or how complicated our understanding of an anarchist should be, and that in fact we can't prejudge, because if we do, we would never know that this is actually what is inside an anarchist's book bag. So just be mindful of that. And then we have an example from Roxane Gay's piece. She writes, "If you're not one statistic, though, you're another. According to the American Society for Bariatric and Metabolic Surgery, 216,000 people received a bariatric procedure in 2016. So here she is citing outside research. That is something we've probably done before, but I just want you to see that I think the previous piece, the use of outside research was more subtle. Here it's more explicit, and that's totally okay. Doctors tout weight loss surgery as the gold standard for weight loss, though a relatively small number of the estimated 1/3 of Americans who are considered obese actually get the surgery. So here what Roxane Gay is doing is she's mentioning what experts do, right? That the surgery is like the best thing for weight loss. But then she's also presenting another piece of observation or another piece of research, which is though experts are saying this is a great thing for weight loss, not a lot of people actually get the surgery, which then, brings the question of why do some people get the surgery where other people don't? If experts are saying that this surgery is great, no matter what, if you're obese, you should get it. You should have the procedure. So that's another thing you can do, right? Like it's called synthesizing, and it's this act of putting one piece of evidence in conversation with another piece of evidence, and from that you're able to generate some larger truth. And here the larger truth is, if this surgery was 100% safe, 100% necessary, then more people probably would elect to do it. Okay, and then continuing, many doctors have used that exact phrase with me, the gold standard, over the years. So in the paragraph above, she's talking about doctors and like citing outside research. And here, Roxane Gay is then exploring how this research relates to her own experience. She continues, they told me that this surgery will save my life, and that if I didn't get this surgery, I wouldn't live until 40. When I turned 40, they told me that if I didn't get the surgery, I wouldn't live until 50. So this is another very common technique in an autoethnography, where you explore what you've been told, either by experts in your own life or by things you've read. Then you compare that to what you know through your own experiences. Um, and then you compare that to what you've learned either through the act of writing this autoethnography or through the act of performing research. And so those three things are constantly in conflict with one another, because I don't know if this is your experience, but there are so many things in my life that what I was told about it versus what I know about it versus what I've learned about it are not at all similar. And so figuring out what to do with that conflict can be an interesting thing to talk about in your autoethnography. And so, in terms of the writing process for this autoethnography, I've already laid out a concrete way that you're going to plan out this autoethnography, and that's through drafting. So, you know, your first draft will be due early on in the semester. Then you'll be completing a second draft, which will be longer, and you'll receive feedback from a partner. And then, after you've received feedback from a partner and feedback from me, you'll be completing a final draft. And so that is a writing process that I hope you use in other assignments that you'll be submitting in other classes. I do think drafting is a necessary part of the writing process for many reasons, but the most important reason is if we are unsure of what we're going to discover when we're writing this autoethnography, it makes sense that the first draft will be super disorganized, hard to understand, maybe super unclear. And so revising helps us. The purpose of revision is to help us get our message across to a reader. The first draft is really you writing for yourself, and then the second draft is you trying to talk to someone else, and then the final draft is you trying to present your work to a group of people. So that's that writing process. And then actual things that you might consider doing is, I would say at this point in the semester, you should start free writing. And here are some things you might do to free write. You might write a list of questions, just any questions that begin with why and how, and then go back and see if any of those questions are worth exploring. Another thing you can do is look through old journal entries or old Facebook posts and see if there are any questions you have based on what you're reading in those entries and posts. The other thing you can do is think of an important moment in your life, write about that moment, and then reread this free write and list some questions you want to answer for the sake of who you are today and also for the benefit of who you were during that moment that you wrote about. You can do all of these things, you can do one of these things, but if you're unsure of what your autoethnography is going to be about, this is a great way to generate some ideas. So the autoethnography is tricky because with a typical research paper, when I had students say, I don't know, professor, what I'm supposed to do, I have no idea what I want to write about, there is a little bit of, assistance I can give, because I can say something like, well, have you explored science, or have you explored something that's going on with technology? But with the autoethnography, it is really centered around the self, and so it really is your responsibility to figure out what you want this project to focus on. So I can't really help you in that way. However, after you've completed your free write, we can certainly look at some of the questions that came up and figure out which one might be more interesting to explore versus another. After you've completed your free write, you can see if there's a question there that is of interest to you. Make sure the question that you pick begins with why or how. I'm suspicious of who and what questions because they tend to be very, you tend not to need as much reflection For example, what is the cause of obesity? Um, might not be as interesting of a project as how has my um, how has my eating habits how have my eating habits impacted um, my academic career or something like that. Um, and so here are two examples of questions that begin with why or how. Why did I not socialize with kids my age when I was 13? How did growing up in South Ozone Park, Queens impact my accent? Then you put your question to the test and you ask of your question these four things. Do I need outside evidence to answer this question? Can I use personal experience to answer this question? Can I generate a study or a survey or an interview or a reflection of some piece of personal writing to answer this question? Does the world not know the answer to this question because they've not yet read about my experiences and my evidence? If the answer is yes to all of these questions, then you've got a winner. You've got a great question for this autoethnography. And you can also use these 4 points to start building your autoethnography. If the answer is yes, you do need outside evidence to answer your question. What kind of outside evidence? Start summarizing the evidence that you found. If the answer is yes to personal experience, summarize that. If you are generating a study or a survey, start doing that and talking about the process. And then once you get the results, summarize the results. And summarize after, of course, after you've done all of these things, why the world has changed. And if the world seems too big, like that's too dramatic, why has the reader's understanding of this question changed because they've read your specific autoethnography? And so, like I said, that this would be a great outline to build out from, but in general, the next part of the writing process would be to write. And so you can write in pieces, meaning like just, I really want to reflect on this personal experience. I don't know when or where it will be in the paper, but it's, alive in my brain right now, so I want to write about it. Sorry. You can, write in the typical linear beginning to end, maybe from end to beginning, however you feel comfortable writing, but that is a necessary part of the writing process to just write. Okay, so I think it's been a little bit over 30 minutes, so if you need to take a break now, might be a great time to pause, but I'm going to continue on, and I just want to briefly talk about paragraphs. So paragraphs, we should be familiar from 111 or English Comp 1, is a way that you're able to organize your writing. It's a way that you're able to give your writing a kind of rhythm. And it's a way that you can explore a single idea, whether it's a single thought, a single claim, a single observation. That's typically how we understand paragraphs. Writers typically organize their paragraphs according to, or can organize their paragraphs according to tone, ideas, places, people. For example, in an autoethnography, I want to visit 6 places, and so each paragraph will be a reflection of one of those places. That's something that you might consider doing in your autoethnography. And however you choose to organize your paragraph is up to you, but the most important thing to me is to make sure you ask yourself, how will I organize my paragraph? Paragraph organization should always be intentional. It should not be accidental or random. And though you might think that how will anyone know whether or not it's intentional or not? Maybe a general reader won't know, but I will. So that's something to be mindful of. And so here is the same paragraph that we read before from Roxane Gay's piece, but I just wanted to show you her paragraph organization. So when she starts with this, if you're not one statistic, though, you're another, she's starting her paragraph with an observation that she's made. Then she gives us that quote from Americans, or not quote, she gives us that statistic from American Society. And so what she's doing there is she's giving an example that supports her observation. So she talks about how, you're one statistic or another, and then she presents a statistic, right? And what's interesting here is she's become a part of the statistic of who gets bariatric procedure because she's elected to get one herself. Then she writes about the gold standard. And so here she's explaining that statistic that she's mentioned, right? So the example talks about how many people have had bariatric surgery, and then she fleshes out that example by saying, that number isn't really that big because the amount of people who are considered obese, actually 216,000 represents a very small portion of that group. So that's how she's organized that paragraph. And then if you go to the next one, she starts with an experience she's had, or like a general statement about experiences she's had with doctors. Then she gives a specific example or a specific thing that she's been told during this experience, right? That she wouldn't live until 40. And then her next sentence is another example from this experience. And so that's another way that you can organize your paragraph. I think this paragraph in particular is really cool if we're thinking about rhythm, because she has this general experience that she's had over the years, and then she gives an example from a specific conversation and another example from a specific conversation, and she's using the same kind of phrasing. Like she says, I wouldn't live until 40. When I turned 40, I wouldn't live until 50. So there's a cool rhythm that develops from repeating the I wouldn't live, I wouldn't live. Also, repeating I wouldn't live kind of sets a tone of hopelessness almost, which then makes us feel relief when she ultimately decides to get the bariatric surgery, which maybe in your reading groups you'll talk about. But I found that interesting that she does that here, because I think so much of what she's doing in her autoethnography is trying to be okay with the fact that she's elected to have bariatric surgery, because I think there's some amount of guilt she feels about it that she's working through. Okay, and so this is just like random us reading different things and working through how the paragraphs are organized. Then there are two actual strategies that comp instructors have used, and I'm sure you've learned about it in 111, but I just wanted to briefly run through it here. One is the meal strategy, and then the other is the C strategy. So meal stands for every paragraph should have a main idea sentence. Every paragraph should have an example sentence that supports the main idea, an analysis sentence that explains the example, and a linking sentence that links to the next example that you'll be providing in the same paragraph, or that links to the next idea you'll be talking about in the next paragraph. And so just to slow down a little bit, if we were trying to develop an M sentence for a summary of Peterson's past experiences piece, one example of that might be, Peterson believes past experiences with writing influence current feelings towards writing. So this is a main idea that I'm going to give examples for. I'm going to analyze those examples. And so for that reason, it's a solid main idea sentence. Couple of tips. Make sure your main idea sentence, if you're using this strategy, is an interpretation or something that is in need of examples and explanation. So for example, a not so great main idea sentence would be something like past experiences is about literacy. That's not really, it's too vague. And so you might have the issue of where do you start with the examples that you give. Another not so great M sentence would be, past experiences is written by Peterson. There's no examples you need to give me, there's no support you need to give me. You're right, it was written by Peterson, and so it seems like the paragraph could just end there. So just be mindful of providing M sentences that are interpretations that require examples. And then when you go on to your example sentence, your example can typically be a paraphrase or a quote from an outside source, or it can be a paraphrase or a quote from a personal experience. So here you might think about an example from Peterson's piece that could support this main idea of past experiences influencing current feelings. Analysis is where you explain your example. And so you could do a couple of things here. You can explain why the example is important. You can show how it's linked to your main idea. Or you can point to what is interesting about this example. You could also do all three of these. It depends on how complicated your example is. And then, like I said, the linking sentence links either to another idea within that same paragraph, or another example, within that same paragraph, or it links to what the next paragraph will be about. And then the other kind of paragraph organization structure is C, which stands for statement, example, explanation. So statement, again, it's pretty much the same thing. It means a topic sentence that explains to your reader what your paragraph will focus on, and you'll see the difference between these two. One is more specific versus another that is too broad, which is what we were mentioning earlier with the Peterson's articles about literacy, right? That's a little bit too broad. E stands for example, so you provide examples to support your topic sentence. And explanation, you explain how your example is related to the topic sentence. You can explain how the example supports the overall point of your essay. You can explain how the evidence or the example supports your thesis statement or your argument. And here I've given you an example of a C paragraph, but for the sake of time, I'm not going to read it over, though you should, just to get a sense of how the C paragraph can look. And so I just wanted to end with these two structures are not meant to be a formula. You're not required to use them. I just find them useful. And just to know that like every topic, every paragraph is different. Some paragraphs might require more explanation. Some paragraphs might require more examples. Some paragraphs might require like multiple ideas even. It depends on what you're trying to do in a paragraph. So just keep that in mind. And so for your comment, what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to craft a paragraph either using the meal strategy or the C strategy. And I'd like this paragraph to be either a summary of one of the readings that you've done for this module. So a summary of Roxane Gay's piece, a summary of Peterson's piece, or the New York piece on anarchism in New York. A paragraph that summarizes one of those articles, or a paragraph that you think will be in your autoethnography. So again, for your comment, please submit a paragraph that uses the meal or C strategy that either summarizes one of the readings or presents what you'll be talking about in your autoethnography. I won't hold you to it, so if you change your mind, that's not a big deal. But I just wanted to give you the opportunity to start writing towards your autoethnography if you're already thinking about ideas. And so I will look forward to your comments, and I'll see you in the next module.